I'll tell you which Buccaneers have to take a big step forward this season. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. No ads, no hashtags, no anything like that. Just legitimate one-on-one conversations with me about the Bucs, about other sports, about anything that's going on. You can do that by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Lots of excitement around the Buccaneers this year, coming off of a solid 2023. But I am going to tell you which Buccaneers have to take a big step forward for that to continue. First, I'm going to apologize to all of you. The insiders knew about it. I texted it out to them. Wednesday was a hot mess for me. Trying to get ready for my son's trip to Niagara. I sat down, I recorded this episode. Well, what was supposed to be this episode, as well as another episode. My microphone wasn't working. Don't really know what happened. It got disconnected somewhere. Not a big deal. Okay, I'll sit down, I'll re-record. Then we lost power for over 24 hours. So I was not able to sit down and record those two shows for you last week before my son and I went to Niagara for his hockey tournament. So I apologize profusely to all of you for not getting those episodes out to you last week. But the good news is 5 episodes this week. We are going to kick it back into high gear. We're doing 5 episodes a week moving forward. But we're going to start things off with the Buccaneers that I feel have to take a big step forward for the Buccaneers to win the division, to have continued success, to go into the playoffs again, and maybe even make a deeper run. And I'm talking about players that need to step up out of the supporting cast. It can't all fall on the shoulders of Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Levante and Antoine and Vita and Tristan. Those guys are going to be those guys, right? Those are the players that you rely on to continue to be the players that they are. Yeah, we would like to see some improvement out of Baker Mayfield. We would like to see an even better season out of Antoine. We would like to see Chris Godwin get more involved earlier in the year. But at the end of the day, those guys are going to be those guys. So I'm talking about who are the other players that have to step up big for the Buccaneers and really help them improve over 2023. So I'm going to start with the defensive side of the ball. One of the biggest questions surrounding the Buccaneers this season is the secondary. They traded away Carlton Davis, and as I mentioned on the show before, Jamel Dean has never played a full season since coming into the NFL. There's a lot of pressure on him now, not just to remain healthy, but to drastically improve over his output last year. However, he's not the guy that I'm looking at. I am looking at Zyon McCollum. McCollum was solid last year in relief of Dean and Davis when they were out of games due to injury, and he earned that starting job that he has now. That's one of the reasons the Bucs were so comfortable trading away Carlton Davis to the Detroit Lions. If they really wanted to, they could have made Carlton Davis's money work. But the confidence that they now have in McCollum opened that door to move on and free up the cap space. Now it's on McCollum to make sure that they didn't make a bad decision. Last season, quarterbacks completed just under 60% of passes when targeting McCollum. That is a vast improvement over the nearly 73% that he allowed in his rookie season. Their quarterback rating also dropped from 118.7 his rookie year to 91 last year. That was in 9 games started in 2023 for Zyon McCollum. He played all 17, but he started 9 due to those injuries. This year, he's going to be the locked and loaded cornerback 2, which means he's going to go up against some of the best receivers that the Buccaneers opponents have to offer. Those numbers have to drop again. That completion percentage, while it was a 14% drop from year 1 to year 2, that has to drop another 7 to 10% this season if McCollum is going to be an impact player. His passes defensed went from 1 in his rookie year to 9 last year. That needs to double going into 2024. In year 1, McCollum was targeted 22 times. Last year, it was 92 times. That's going to likely double or come close to doubling again this year. If he got credit for a pass defense nearly 1 out of every 10 times he was targeted last year, he's going to have to come away with around 20 passes defensed this season. That said, he also needs to get out there with the jugs machine and work on his catching because he dropped about 5 interceptions last season. If McCollum only has, let's say, 15 passes defense this season, that's fine as long as he adds 3 or 4 interceptions to his stat line. He has 0 in his career so far. I'm sure many of you everydayers remember David's bold prediction every week being a Zyon McCollum interception, and it just never happened. There were times that it was close. There were times that he got his hands on the ball and dropped it, but he has yet to get that interception, in a game in his career. Those are the kinds of impact plays as a cornerback 2 that he has to make this year if he's going to be that full-time starter that they count on for 17 games and beyond if we're talking postseason. Clutch pass breakups and flipping the field with takeaways. He's not going to be a blitzing corner. He has to make up for that with other types of impact plays. That's the interceptions. That's the pass breakups. That's forced fumbles and fumble recoveries. That's how he can take the next big step for this football team. And we all know that at some point, Dean is going to miss time, which means Zyon is going to go toe-to-toe with the opposing team's number 1 guy. That's where his growth and elevation can really shine, or it can get him exposed. When we're talking about going up against CeeDee Lamb, against Amon-Ra St. Brown, against Drake London, against Chris Olave, against these top-tier wide receivers that Zyon McCollum may have to face if Dean is missing time, Zyon has to be an impact guy. We have to see a big year out of Zyon McCollum to really go back and say, you know what? That trade of Carlton Davis was the right move because Zyon is a legit starter in this league. Who is the other guy on the defense, though, that has to step up in a big way? That's next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. I used profit boost in every single game of the NBA Finals when I was placing my parlays over there. I'm going to do it for those of you watching on Monday or listening on Monday. I'm going to do it tonight for Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. But if those aren't your bag, right now, Kansas City and San Francisco are tied at plus 600 each as the favorites to win the Super Bowl, while the Buccaneers are at plus 5,500, trailing teams like the Chargers, the Steelers, the Jags, and the Bears. In fact, they're plus 290 to win the NFC South again, trailing the Falcons. So if you think the Bucs are going to win their fourth straight division title, jump in now and make yourself a little bit of money. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener review every day. Everydayers, make sure you're coming back tomorrow. We have some interesting pre-training camp power rankings from Mike Florio. That is going to headline the show tomorrow. But in the meantime, if you want to hear the latest news from all around sports, Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, like I just mentioned, you're going to have some great previews, and you're going to have some great reactions, as well as NFL news, because the NFL never sleeps. Plus, you got baseball, you got the Olympics coming up, but you want to hear more than just those national narratives, and you want the biggest stories without manufactured fake arguments and screaming. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. There's another player on the defense that I have pegged as needing a big year this season, and it is none other than KJ Britt. Britt appears to be the leader in the battle for the starting linebacker job next to Lavonte David. But although he played well in relief of Devin White last year and actually took over that starting role late in the season and into the playoffs, he wasn't without some shortcomings. Britt has to be better in pass coverage. There's no way around it. Without question, Britt has to improve in pass coverage. He was no better than Devin White in that part of his game. And to be a 3-down linebacker that is below average in coverage, it's not a good combination for this Buccaneers defense. And to make matters a little more murky, he isn't the blitzer that Devin White was, so he doesn't have that aspect of his game to rely on. However, if Britt cannot find a way to improve that part of his game, he's going to have Servassier Dennis breathing down his neck and trying to take his job. More than that, he's going to leave the Bucs defense vulnerable on key third downs. If he's matched up with a running back out of the backfield or a big athletic tight end on third down and can't get the Bucs defense off the field, he is going to wind up off the field in exchange for someone else. He cannot allow drives to get extended and turn into scoring opportunities for the opposition because he struggles in pass coverage. He has to be able to lock down that part of his game. You know that Lavonte has his ear and is trying to coach him up and teach him. And with more experience is going to come some improvement, you would hope, for KJ Britt. But right now, that is a very suspect part of his game. I like KJ Britt a lot, and I think he has shown flashes of being a starting caliber linebacker, but this is a make or break time for him. This is his opportunity to shine, to really grab hold of this opportunity to become a starter in the NFL, after sitting behind Devin White for all these years. But if he's still a liability in coverage without that flashy playmaking ability that Devin White had, to compensate for the poor pass coverage, then really he's just a sitting duck on the defensive side of the ball. I talked about it on this show last year. David talked about it on this show last year when we were going through and we were watching Kalijah Cansey talking about how much Servassier Dennis really jumped off of the tape. He still has that kind of play in him. He still has that playmaking ability. He still has that flash, and he's going to give KJ Britt a run for his money. So it is vital for Britt to work on his coverage against those running backs, against those tight ends. Flipping things over to the offense, I realized that I said that these are 4 Bucs that need to step up, but one of them hasn't even stepped on the field yet for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm going to point to rookie wide receiver Jalen McMillan. McMillan has to be a stud for this offense to take some of the pressure off of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Last year, Evans and Godwin accounted for 2,299 receiving yards. That was 56.8% of Baker's passing yards going to just those two guys. That is too much. I'm not saying that Evans and Godwin shouldn't both have 1,000-yard seasons. Obviously, I want them to each have 1,000-yard seasons. But, if you're relying on them for nearly 60% of your passing game output, you're asking for trouble. Last year, they got away with it. This year, they have to have a third receiver step up and be a significant contributor. And I'm looking to Jalen McMillan to be that guy. They thought they had that guy in Russell Gage. Now it's going to fall on the shoulders of McMillan. It's going to be an adjustment for him, and he might get off to a little bit of a slow start. But if this offense is going to click the way that it needs to and put up points on the board, the third leading receiver on the team cannot be the running back. In terms of wide receivers only last season, Palmer was third with 385 yards, followed by David Moore with 94, and then Devin Tompkins with 83. You can't have that. The third leading receiver needs to be a receiver, and McMillan is the guy with the skill set poised to be that player. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for the running backs and the tight ends in this offense, but McMillan has to be the pressure release valve for Evans and Godwin to really be able to go to work. If these teams know that there's no receiver threats outside of those two, just like last year, then they can scheme against them and against the running back to force Baker to try to beat them in other ways with other guys. If McMillan goes out there and he makes defenses and defensive coordinators pay for underestimating him, it opens up everything. It gives Mike and Chris one-on-one looks. It opens up the first level of the defense for dump-offs to Rachaad and Bucky. It opens up Cade Otton to go one-on-one with linebackers where I'd say 7 times out of 10, Cade Otton is going to win that matchup, and he'll be able to pick up those key first downs that we saw he was so vital in being able to do last year. However, all of that starts with wide receiver 3 and the rookie taking advantage of opportunities early on and setting the tone for what the passing game could and should look like throughout the duration of the season. The single most important player on the Buccaneers that needs to take a step forward this season, that's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on a Monday episode of Locked On Bucs, and I'm going to cut right to the chase. The most important player on the Buccaneers that needs to take a step forward is Rachaad White. And I know what you're saying right now. James, Rachaad nearly ran for 1,000 yards last year behind a terrible interior offensive line, and he had another 549 receiving yards to go with it. What else do you want him to do? I don't want him to do anything. I need him to be more consistent and do better than 3.6 yards per carry. And trust me, I know that's not entirely his fault and that he was being blown up by groups of defenders in the backfield last year, but he also showed his indecisiveness on more than a few occasions, and that cost him. It cost the team big opportunities. At least 3 to 4 times a game, we saw Rachaad hesitate and miss a running lane, causing tackles for no gain or a loss, or maybe it turned what could have been a 4 or 5 yard gain into a 1 yard gain. That has to improve this season. Rachaad could have easily run for over 1,100 yards if his vision and decision-making was better. He has to hit those running lanes without hesitation, without the dancing around, and with full speed this season to take his game up to the next level. I love Rachaad, and I think that he can easily be talked about as one of the top 10 running backs in the NFL if he can be a more assertive runner. Obviously, the addition of Graham Barton and the upgrade at left guard are going to help with Rachaad's ability in the run game. But think about the fact that Rachaad is already one of the better dual threat running backs in the league. If he can add just a yard per carry to his average this year, we're talking about 1,200 plus yards on the ground alone. The other thing we need to see is for him to hit pay dirt more. 6 rushing touchdowns, 3 receiving touchdowns. We need to see Rachaad hit double digits there. I don't care what the split is between rushing and receiving. It can be 5 and 5. He can have 2 rushing touchdowns and 8 receiving touchdowns, but he needs to have 10 plus touchdowns in 2024. That, coupled with the improvement in the yard per carry average, it's going to get him into the upper tier of NFL running backs. No, I'm not talking about getting him up there with Christian McCaffrey, but he could be in the conversation with a Bijan Robinson, a Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, who knows? Maybe Kyron Williams is going to jump into that Christian McCaffrey stratosphere. He can be up there with Jahmyr Gibbs. Those are the kinds of running backs that Rachaad has the skill and the talent to be talked about with, but he has to be able to show it on the field. Of course, the downside to all of that is the fact that he's going to be heading into a contract year after that kind of potential output. So the Bucs may not even be able to sign him back if he goes out and puts up those level of numbers. But Rachaad is the key to the Bucs offense taking a big enough step forward that they not only replicate their success of last season, but they exceed it, that they get past the divisional round of the playoffs and get into the NFC Championship. You talk about the addition of Bucky Irving. How do you prevent Bucky Irving from even going beyond becoming the RB2 and starting to steal some of Rachaad White snaps? You go out there and you average 4 to 4.5 yards per carry. You hit pay dirt consistently. You are hitting those holes and hitting those running lanes quickly, efficiently, and at full speed. Those are the things that Rachaad has to do in order to elevate his game from where we saw it last year. Again, right on the cusp of a 1,000-yard rushing season to now, let's get past 1,000. Let's see him hit 1,100, even 1,200 yards. That's how he's going to stave off Bucky Irving from being a guy that is cutting into, getting 40 to 45% of the snaps rather than 30 to 35%. It's going to keep Rachaad White on the field on third downs as a passing option for Baker Mayfield, or being the guy that's on the field on key 3rd and 1s and being able to pick up 2 or 3 yards, keep the chains moving, and create scoring opportunities. He becomes that kind of threat, coupled with McMillan doing what he needs to do, what the Bucs thought Russell Gage was going to be able to do in this offense, and then Mike Evans being Mike Evans, Chris Godwin being Chris Godwin, and Cade Otton probably taking a little bit of a step forward. We could be talking about one of the top 10 offenses in the league. I talked last week about how their points per game jumped from 2022 to 2023, and I expect another 3-point per game jump from 2023 to 2024. If that's going to happen, Jalen McMillan and Rachaad White have to be those guys on the offensive side of the ball that really just take a stranglehold on their opportunities and make the most of it. And they're causing defenses to pay. McMillan is winning one-on-one matchups. Rachaad is rushing for 4 yards a game and getting into the end zone. He's still that big time factor that's getting 550 to 600 yards receiving as a safety valve option for Baker Mayfield, or some of these design screens and dump offs to Rachaad to get him into space where he does the absolute most damage. That is where this Buccaneers offense can really take off. Graham Barton is a big part of that. Ben Bredesen or Sua Opeta are going to be a big part of that on the interior. You're going to have some growth out of Cody Mauch there, going from his rookie to his sophomore season. Rachaad White, we could be talking about a potential Pro Bowler if all of these things line up and Rachaad really takes this step forward that I'm calling for. So my 4 guys on the Buccaneers that have to step up and have big years this season: Zyon McCollum, KJ Britt, Jalen McMillan, Rachaad White. Prepare yourself, because I'm going to be hammering this point all offseason, into training camp, into preseason, and probably into the regular season. But these are the official Locked On Bucs X Factors for 2024, or at least until training camp starts and I am forced to pivot away because of something that happened. I mean, if KJ Britt loses that starting job to Servassier Dennis, we're going to have to pivot. But KJ Britt is in the driver's seat. It's up to him to make these improvements and solidify that starting job that he seemed to have earned in the second half of 2023. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Again, make sure you're coming back tomorrow. Interesting power rankings pre-training camp from Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk. Going to dive into that. In the meantime, check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Make sure you are following along on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're subscribed on YouTube, make sure that you have those notifications turned on so you know anytime I am going live. And, of course, you become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.